The movie opens by showing 200 years BC, where the Qin state emerged victorious in a war against the Wei state, with a slave named Xin playing a significant role, eventually rising to the rank of battalion commander. Over the last 6 months, Xin was directly trained by the Qin state's Grand General named Oki, who tasked Xin with supporting the weakest tribes in the Qin state to win battles against other tribes. With Xin's intelligence, he devised clever strategies that ultimately helped the weakest tribes to fight against their enemies. Several months later, as the proud Qin general Hiyoko prepared to expand the borders, the Qin state faced a sudden attack from the Zhou state, seeking revenge for their previous defeat in a war. 16 years ago, during a war between Qin and Zhao, a Qin general had mercilessly slaughtered surrendered Zhao troops. Since then, the Zhou state has harbored a grudge against the Qin general's unfair treatment. Upon hearing about the internal conflict in the Qin state, as Minister Ryofui plotted to seize King Aizi's throne, the Zhao troops saw an opportunity to avenge the past massacre. Because the attack was sudden, Aizi, who couldn't call upon Hiyoko's troops on duty, had to reluctantly summon Ryofui and his trusted aides to handle the Zhou state's attack. Although Aizi knew that his decision would put him in debt to his uncle, who harbored for the throne, Aizi felt he had no other choice as Ryofui commanded a considerable military force. When facing Aizi, Ryofui suggested forming an emergency force and asked Aizi to appoint General Mobu, who was Ryofui's trusted confidant, as the commander against the Zhou state's troops. On the other hand, a government official named Shabun Kun questioned the decision to appoint Mobu as the Qin state's war commander, noting that Mobu's expertise primarily lay in offensive tactics rather than defense. Given the conditions of the war against Zhao, which required both offensive and defensive strategies, Shabun Kun argued that only Oki could effectively handle the situation. However, Oki was currently resting from the war, leaving Shabun Kun's request unanswered. At the same time, Shabun Kun also enlisted Xin to strengthen the Qin state's military against the Zhou troops. In the midst of this discussion, Oki and Xin suddenly entered the royal chamber, with Oki expressing his willingness to assume the role of war commander. This led Mobu, who initially was considered the strongest candidate for the war commander, to reluctantly accept being a battalion commander to reinforce Oki's troops on the battlefield. At that moment, Oki then requested a private conversation with Aizi, while everyone else leaving the chamber, allowing Oki to discuss the king's motives for uniting the conflicted states on the Chinese mainland. Reflecting on the past, during the reign of Aizi's grandfather, King Cici, the Qin state was esteemed for its leadership under 6 grand generals, including Oki. During Cici's reign, a ceasefire between the Qin and Zhou states was established after To, Aizi's father and the crown prince, was detained by the Zhou state as a guarantee. During his captivity, Aizi was born and grew up with his father in Zhou until one day, Ryofui orchestrated a rescue for the royal members. Unfortunately, he only managed to save To, leaving Aizi to fend for himself in Zhou. For years, Aizi grew up without family and was considered an enemy by all Zhou citizens until a black market merchant named Sika saved him and provided him with a place to hide. Several years later, Aizi learned of King Cici's passing, which resulted in Aizi's ascension to the position of royal crown prince, with To assuming the throne as the new Qin king. The Qin state promptly dispatched a spy to retrieve Aizi and return him to the palace. Aware of this, Sika and her companions resolved to help Aizi in returning his homeland by utilizing their smuggling network into Zhou. Despite successfully bribing the guards along their route, their plan was thwarted at the final checkpoint when a guard suddenly shot an arrow at the concealed box where Aizi was hiding, injuring his arm. Remarkably, Aizi remained calm as all his suffering after being abandoned by To had him to pain and emotion, leading him to doubt his ability to be a good king. However, Sika reassured him and urged him to safely return to the Qin state. Shortly after, Zhao troops, aware of Aizi's escape, were sent to pursue him. This caused Sika's plan to smuggle Aizi to fail as they were attacked by Zhao troops, and Sika and the others were forced to sacrifice their lives to save Aizi before he finally met with the Qin troops. Upon discovering Sika severely wounded from the enemy's arrow, Izzy was overcome with suppressed emotions of sorrow. Before taking her last breath, Sika asked him to promise to become a great king and to stop the wars between the 7 states while uniting all the lands in mainland China. From that moment on, Izzy was determined to fulfill his promise to Sika, who sacrificed herself to save him. Returning to the present, Oki, having heard Izzy's explanations, instructed Sin, who had been concealed behind a pillar, to gather everyone back to the royal hall. The Grand General announced his return to active duty as commander of the Qin army and appointed Sin, his disciple, as the leader of a specialized unit comprising 100 men directly under his command. To strengthen the army further, Sin enlisted Kyokai to join his forces. That night, before the battle began, Sin practiced martial arts with Kyokai, who possessed exceptional fighting skills inherited from her lineage of assassins. Curious, Sin asked about the source of her clan's extraordinary combat abilities. Kyokai then explained that her clan communicated with the gods through a sword dance ritual passed down through generations. During the ritual, individuals would be possessed with the spirits of the gods, so descendants of the assassin clan usually performed the ritual to fight off dozens of attackers. Despite the ritual's potency, other clans possessed similar abilities, and some martial artists unwittingly tapped into this power. Among them, the most formidable were those who believed themselves to be incarnations of gods, known as Bisin, whose martial prowess surpassed that of ordinary individuals. The following day, Oki led the Qin army towards the battlefield, ready to face the Zhao army commanded by 3 battalion leaders, Choso, Mundgoku, and Fuqi, who also served as strategists. On the other hand, Oki led 3 large units consisting of his elite troops, Raifui's troops under Mobu's leadership, and the main Qin army. Once the battle commenced, Mobu's troops immediately launched an attack on the enemy, followed by the elite troops on the left flank of the battlefield. As the battle commenced, Mobu's troops initiated an assault, followed by the elite forces attacking the left flank. Observing the Zio's restrained response, Oki ordered an overt attack despite being outnumbered, aiming to keep Sin's forces undetected by the enemy. Oki assigned Sin's unit the task of directly targeting and eliminating Fuqi, the primary leader of the Zio forces, knowing Fuqi's expertise in analyzing warfare could be detrimental to Qin's strategy. To divert Fuqi's attention, Oki deployed 100 infantry troops, hoping they would be underestimated by the Zhao commander. Although some of Sin's members were initially hesitant about the attack they were about to launch, after Sin convinced his troops, they all began to infiltrate towards the enemy's rear defense lines by climbing the hills. Unfortunately, Zhao forces were also stationed in that hill area, which made Sin's troops have to confront the enemy forces, causing them some trouble. Continuously pressed by the opposing forces, Sin decided to divide his troops into 2 groups, where the first group would hold the cliff and block the enemy forces, while the other group, commanded directly by Sin, would continue the journey to behind the hill where Fuqi was stationed. Reports of the Qin forces' infiltration into the hills appeared to have reached Fuqi's attention. However, as he was preoccupied with organizing the main Zhao forces, he appeared not to pay much attention to the attack, especially since Sin's forces were not trained soldiers and numbered less than 100. At that time, Fuqi perceived Sin's troops as insignificant compared to his large army. Meanwhile, on the primary battlefield, the elite Qin forces seemed to be gaining the upper hand with relentless assaults, prompting the Zhao frontline troops to retreat momentarily. Seizing the opportunity, the Qin warriors intensified their attack, unaware that it was a trap orchestrated by Fuqi to swiftly eliminate them. As the Qin forces advanced, Fuqi suddenly commanded his archers to rain arrows upon them. Due to this sudden attack, most of the Qin forces eventually faltered, and if left unchecked, the Qin forces would surely be defeated. On the other hand, Sin and his companions, observing the unfolding events from the hilltop, swiftly descended to launch a direct assault on Fuqi, aiming to end the battle before the Qin forces faced total annihilation. Sensing the threat, Fuqi's protective forces engaged Sin's group without delay. At that moment, Fuqi, having seen the abilities of Sin and Kyokai in defeating the Zao forces, finally realized that he could not underestimate Sin's group, which turned out to be no ordinary force. Quickly, Fu Qi ordered all his troops to retreat before they were defeated by Sin's forces. Unfortunately, Fu Qi's efforts were too late because Sin and his group had successfully penetrated the tight defense of Fu Qi's protective forces, leading Sin to suddenly run towards the commander of the Zhao forces and attack him. With a single sword slash, Sin succeeded in killing Fu Qi, the main commander of the Zhao forces, signaling that the Qin forces had won the battle that day. Upon learning of Fu Qi's demise, Choso immediately ordered his troops to temporarily retreat and relocate their base to the hills. According to Oki, the victory was merely the start, as the true battle lay ahead. Later that night, after a day of battle, Sin with other soldiers gathered around a campfire to celebrate their victory on the battlefield's first day. In the midst of their happiness, they were all startled by the appearance of a man carrying a large weapon who attacked them. Sin and Kyokai tried to stop the man, but unfortunately, their strength was far below the mysterious man who introduced himself as Hauken, one of the feared Busin or war gods, instilling fear in Kyokai's assassin clan. Towards the film's conclusion, it is shown how news of Hauken's attack on the Qin forces finally reached the royal court, and Shobun-kun, who also heard the report, realized what was happening. Shobun-kun recalls a past incident involving Kyo, one of the Qin kingdom's 6 great generals and Oki's lover, who dueled with Hauken until Kyo suffered defeat because she did not realize that Hauken was a powerful Busin. Enraged by Kyo's death, Oki sought vengeance by challenging Hauken to a duel, managing to wound him gravely. Despite this, Hauken miraculously survived and disappeared thereafter, leaving his whereabouts unknown. Upon hearing of Oki leading the Qin forces against Shao, Hauken re-emerges to seek revenge. At the same time, Oki, intending to descend to the battlefield against Shao, also realized the presence of Hauken, who sought revenge against him. Therefore, their appearance on the battlefield was closely related to the vendetta they carried from the past. Moral lesson from the story: always be wary of surprise attacks, especially when you are the commander of an army, because you may not be able to join the party during the victory celebration.